Welcome to Dr. Walls and Friends here on the Sisters in Harmony Network. We are here preserving the legacy of the legendary Dr. Moses Powell. And I'm joined here today with Yusef Salaam. And many of you may remember him from a sad case that happened back in 1989 where he was accused, one of the accused in the Central Park Five. How are you doing today?
I'm actually doing very good. I'm doing well, as most people would say. Can't keep a good man down.
That's
can't
right.
keep the truth down. Can't keep the truth buried.
Yes.
And by the grace of God, I'm here today.
All right.
Yeah.
Why don't you give the people a little reminder? We have many watchers who will remember the case as soon as I said it. They
Gotcha.
know, some who have forgotten, and some who didn't continue to follow, so they don't know what happened.
Well, see, unfortunately, most of the times when you talk about the Central Park jogger case, the first thing that comes to most people's minds is, oh, that Wilding case.
Mm-hmm.
And it's unfortunate because that's what the negative story, the residue of the negative story lingered.
Yes.
As opposed to the positive that came out of what the negative story did.
Mm-hmm.
So the positive was that even though we went to jail for a crime that we didn't commit, 13 years later, the truth came out.
Yes.
The truth finally came out.
Yes.
But 1989, it was a time where there were huge divides in the city. So you had a very, very clear-cut line where if you lived on this side of town, you were part of what was known as the darker enclaves of society.
Oh, wow.
You were part of what was known as people who were raised animalistically.
Gotcha.
Which led to the fact that they were able to use colorful language back then, like calling us wolf packs and calling us animals. Essentially, it also caused common citizens like Donald Trump to take out their own money. I think he spent something like $85,000 in New York City's newspapers calling for the reinstatement of the death penalty specifically for our case.
Oh, wow.
So had this been the 1930s, 40s, or maybe even earlier or just a little bit later,
Yes.
you can almost be sure that they would have come to our homes, and instead of taking us down to the police precinct, we would have been drug out of our homes,
Yes.
probably castrated, definitely hung from trees in Central Park.
Yes.
So this was the climate that we were being convicted around. The conviction had already happened before we had even gone to trial. Common citizens also, like I think his name was Pat Buchanan. He wrote an article in the New York City's papers as well that said something to the effect, if we were to take the eldest one, which was Corey Wise.
And he was 16.
He was
at the
16
time.
years old at the time. I mean, still a child.
Right.
Take the eldest one and hang him from a tree. They weren't talking about us doing acrobats and, stringing us up and saying hi to the public.
Right.
They were talking about strange fruit, you see.
Right.
Hang him from a tree and take the rest of us and horsewhip us. He said, maybe the city's park will be safe again.
Wow.
This was the climate, like I said, that we were being railroaded into.
Wow.
And it wasn't until 13 years later that the truth came out. But let me tell you how the truth came out. The truth came out because the real perpetrator of the crime came forward. The media coverage back then did such a dismal job of coverage that it was on, let's say, page 30 of most newspapers, page 50 of most newspapers.
Oh, wow.
So most people didn't even know
Exactly.
that we were exonerated.
Exactly.
Most people had heard that we got freed, but they thought maybe it was a technicality or something like that. They never put the one and one together and said, wow, you mean to tell me that these guys were actually innocent
The whole
all
time.
the time? This
And
whole
you
time.
were in jail for...
We all spent varying times in jail, but we all spent at least 7 years in prison.
Right.
Corey Wise spent 13 years in prison.
Wow.
This story is so deep that when they came to, when they were looking for us, they came to my apartment, and my name had happened to get on some list.
Okay.
Corey Wise's name was not on the list of paper that they were looking for.
Okay.
When they asked me who I was, I said, I'm Yusef Salaam. They said, oh, here's one of the people we were looking for right here. And they asked Corey, who was he? He said, I'm Corey Wise. They said, now you'll see this in the film. Your name ain't on the list, but you want to come downtown with your buddy?
Oh, no.
He came home 13 years later.
Oh, stop.
I came home 7 years later. So, I mean, this was such a horrific
Yes.
crime. Not only that happened, but that happened to us.
It was a double crime.
It was a triple crime. Because I'm gonna tell you what else happened.
Go ahead.
The triple side to the crime was when Patricia Mealy, the Central Park jogger,
Yes.
when she woke from her coma, the very first folks that she I'm thinking about met but made acquaintance with,
Okay.
or the people who filled in the gap
Understand.
as to what happened to her. How
Right.
did she get here?
Because she was in a coma for how long?
I don't know exactly, but they thought she was going to
12
die.
days
They
or
did not
something
think that
like-
she was going
right,
to survive this.
right.
She was in a coma for so long that when she came out of the coma, first people she met was the doctors who cared for her.
Right.
Then the DA's office and the police. And so them filling in the gap, the missing pieces of the gap was, we have the people who did this to you.
So filling in the gap with misinformation.
Misinformation, false information, and caused her to believe that they had the real perpetrators of the crime, when in fact, even in 1989, our supporters were telling everyone, you got the wrong people.
Wow.
You police officers, you DA's office, you need to do your job
Right.
and search for the real perpetrator of the
Right.
crime. And they didn't. And what
Right.
happened? Matias Reyes was left to continue to hurt and maim more individuals and ultimately murder a young Latina pregnant woman and her child.
Wow.
And that's what he was caught for.
Wow.
So 13 years later, when he confessed to this crime,
Right.
he exonerated us in a way, you know. But he can never be convicted of this crime.
Wow.
The statute of limitation for rape is 7 years in New York City. So he can never be convicted of this crime. But when I tell you this was like such an injustice, it was more than a dropping of the ball.
Yes.
You know, people always
Yes.
ask us things like, well, is it about the money? So we're suing the city and the police department and everybody involved for a total of $250 million.
Okay.
But what that means, and first of all, it's never about the money. But what it means is when you compensate for wrongs that were committed
Right.
for New York City's citizens, you are also saying we will never do this again.
Right.
And we don't want this ever to happen
That's
to
right.
anyone else.
That's right.
You know, it's a mind-blowing
It is
story.
so
Most
many
people, when I tell them,
Yes.
they think that I'm talking about a fictional story. They think I'm talking about something that I made up. Wow, Yusef has a very colorful mind.
Mm-hmm.
He made up this story about being railroaded until or unless they know who we are, where we
Exactly.
came from, what we've
Exactly.
been through. But ultimately, this is also a story that it kind of points to being able to transcend
And
the
that's
depths of hell that they put you through.
Yes.
So I mean, yes, we are the Central Park Five, but the label Central Park Five is not I don't think that any one of us should be limited by that.
yes.
Because what we've been able to do in terms of moving on, in terms of continuing to educate folks,
Yes.
in terms of continuing to put our faces out there and be a tool that can be used as to teach people
Right.
about one, what happens when you do the wrong thing in the media, or what happens when you do the wrong thing in policing,
Right.
or what happens when you do the wrong thing in prosecuting. You send people to jail for crimes that they didn't commit, and they lose so much of their lives. I mean,
Right.
we were 14, 15, and 16, right? And most would argue that these are the formative years that will prepare you for what you're going to be like as an adult.
Exactly.
We didn't get that education. We got education on how to stay alive in prison.
And I'm going to pause you right there, and we're going to take a quick break, and we'll be back very shortly on Dr. Walls and Friends.